Ever catch yourself in a loop, feeling a certain way or doing something and you don't quite know why? Mm-hmm. Or maybe you get that gut feeling, that hunch about something, a kind of knowing that isn't just logic.
Yeah, absolutely.
It really feels like there's this whole intricate world operating just beneath the surface of our everyday awareness. And today on The Deep Dive, that's exactly what we're going to explore.
Welcome. And you sent us a really fascinating collection of material this time. Our mission, as always, is to distill the most crucial insights from these sources you've given us, basically giving you a shortcut to being well-informed.
Right.
We're diving into, well, everything from the bedrock of psychological thought, Freud, Jung, to more practical self-help stuff from Hubbard, Murphy, Howard, and even exploring wisdom from traditions like Buddhism and Mysticism. It's quite a range.
It really is. And what's striking, I think, is that while these sources might speak different languages, use different terms, come from different places, our goal here is to, meticulously examine the underlying patterns, the common threads that kind of weave through them all.
Exactly.
We want to look at the core ideas, psychological, philosophical, even metaphysical, and really share how they connect, how they inform each other.
And what's so interesting is how often these voices, which seem so different on the surface, actually seem to be circling the same fundamental truths about, us, about the human experience. They're all grappling with the mind's complexity, the nature of our struggles, and, the possible paths toward greater understanding, maybe.
Yeah.
Well-being.
Okay, so let's start to unpack some of that. One of the first things that becomes pretty clear across these sources is this consistent idea that our minds aren't just one single thing. There's this recurring notion of different levels or layers at play.
Precisely. Think about Freud's iceberg image. It's famous for a reason. He talked about the conscious mind, just that small tip you see above the water, what we're aware of right now.
Right.
Then the preconscious, sort of a waiting room for thoughts you can easily access. But the bulk, the really significant part, is the unconscious, that huge submerged realm.
Mm-hmm.
As one source puts it, it's like an iceberg. The most important part of the mind is down there beneath the surface. And it profoundly shapes our behavior, often in ways we just don't realize. So the key insight for you here is that a lot of what drives you operates outside your immediate awareness.
So those gut feelings or patterns might have roots we haven't looked at.
Exactly.
And he builds on this, doesn't he, with his idea of the shadow?
He does. He calls it an unconscious snag, a cognitive blind spot. These are basically the parts of ourselves we tend to reject. Or maybe we just don't want to see them, things we disown.
Yeah, the uncomfortable bits.
Right. And Jung points out we're often completely unaware of these shadow aspects, but they can still really influence our actions, our reactions. It's like having a hidden program running that can, sometimes mess with our conscious plans.
And it's fascinating to see the parallels in Buddhism, too. The language is different, of course.
Totally different vocabulary.
But Buddhism talks a lot about ignorance, avidya, and these unconscious mental factors that shape our experience and cause difficulties.
Right. And the whole practice of mindfulness in Buddhism is fundamentally about bringing awareness to exactly those hidden parts of the mind.
So Freud's unconscious, Jung's shadow, those rejected bits.
Yeah.
You could see that overlapping with the Buddhist idea of unskillful mental states hiding out.
Absolutely. Both perspectives are acknowledging these hidden negative influences. There's this shared understanding. A huge amount of our mental activity happens outside our awareness, but it has real power.
Okay, here's where it gets, for me, really interesting. Building on that layered mind idea, a lot of these sources also seem to talk about a kind of internal split, a sense of the self being divided, in conflict somehow.
Exactly. Jung talked about how within each of us lies two parts of a whole. There's the person we want to be, our ideal self, maybe.
The persona.
Yeah, the persona, the mask we show the world. And then there's some other part of us that conflicts with that, creates tension. And Vernon Howard echoes this with his concept of the false self. He calls it a fictitious collection of self-images. He says we need to release that for inner liberation. He really stresses that we often operate from this inauthentic self, like we're playing a role that doesn't quite fit us.
Right, like wearing a mask. And maybe the mask starts to feel tight or creates friction with who we really are underneath. And then you've got Buddhism's concept of anatta, non-self, which can be tricky.
Yeah, that one takes some wrapping your head around.
It doesn't mean you literally don't exist, right? But more that the idea of a fixed, permanent you that we cling to. That's the illusion. And clinging to that false sense of a permanent self is seen as a major root of suffering in Buddhism.
So you see the pattern again. Different terms. Jung's internal tension, Howard's false self, Buddhism's non-self idea. They're all pointing to some kind of internal division or conflict being a big part of our psychological suffering, our unease.
Okay, let's dig into that suffering itself then. Where do these sources say it actually comes from? What's the root cause?
Again, the emphasis seems to be largely internal. Freud pointed to unconscious conflicts as a primary source of human behavior.
Yeah.
He suggested that when the hidden stuff in the unconscious clashes with our conscious desires, or maybe societal rules, that creates psychological tension, suffering.
And Jung elaborated on that, didn't he? Talking about the resistance between the ego, the self we consciously try to be to fit in, and the id, those more primal drives.
Exactly. That push and pull between our social mask and our deeper urges generates distress. It's an internal battleground.
Right. And Buddhist philosophy addresses this head-on with the Four Noble Truths.
Foundational stuff.
The first truth is dukkha suffering, or maybe better, that underlying feeling of unease, unsatisfactoriness.
Yeah, it's broader than just pain.
And the later truths point to craving, tantra, wanting things to be different, wanting in ignorance, avidya, that fundamental misunderstanding of reality, as the main causes of this dukkha.
So it's not just external events causing suffering. It's our internal reaction, our clinging, and our ignorance.
And Jung's idea of projection fits right in here, doesn't it?
Perfectly.
He said, through our rejection of the parts of ourselves we dislike, we unconsciously project them onto others.
Which is why the specifics we dislike in others are an indication of what we dislike in ourselves. We basically paint our own rejected shadow onto the people around us.
So we end up fighting our own internal battles out there in the world with other people.
Exactly. And this connects directly to what Vernon Howard says about self-honesty. He argues that blaming external stuff stops us from changing internally, which really echoes the Buddhist view. Suffering starts in our own minds, not just from what happens out there. Those things we dislike in others, they can be a mirror.
Okay, so if the problem is largely internal, then the solution, the path to healing or liberation, must also involve looking inward.
Logically, yes.
And it really seems like a key element across all these traditions is the absolute importance of bringing that unconscious stuff into conscious awareness.
Absolutely central. For Freud, the whole point of psychoanalysis, dream analysis, free association, was to make the unconscious conscious. He believed bringing those hidden conflicts into the light was the essential first step to resolving them.
And Jung had that powerful line, when an inner situation is not made conscious, it happened outside as fate.
Yeah, it really highlights the need to become aware of our shadow for psychological integration, for taking control of our lives, essentially.
And Vernon Howard, he constantly stresses self-awareness. His path to inner liberation involves self-honesty, persistence, the study and application of spiritual principles.
All of which depend on knowing yourself, honestly and deeply.
Right. And then, of course, Buddhist practice is fundamentally about cultivating awareness. Mindfulness, meditation.
The Noble Eightfold Path explicitly includes right mindfulness and right concentration.
Yeah.
Essential steps.
So across the board, different methods, maybe psychoanalysis, shadow work, mindfulness, but the core principle is the same. Bring the hidden stuff into the light. It's crucial for healing, growth, liberation.
Couldn't agree more. That awareness piece is paramount.
Now, here's a subtle point, maybe.